Hi, I am Professor Eduardo Mendieta, and I teach philosophy at Stony Brook University. But in the fall semester of 2015, I will start teaching at Penn State University. Today, I want to talk to you about race, and more precisely about racism. What I have to say will address the following seeming paradox. How is it that while most scientists and philosophers claim that race does not exist, it nonetheless has such a material consequence in the lives of most individuals? Let us begin with a thought experiment. If you're white, how much are you willing to pay to become black? If you're black, how much are you willing to pay to become white? The point of this thought experiment is to get us to recognize that we do have a basic intuition or awareness that being of one or another race entails certain kinds of privileges and assets or liabilities and privations. I'm going to claim that while race does not exist, it is in fact produced, renewed, and made enduring by racist institutions. Following the work of Angela Davis in Loic Wacant, two great critics of U.S. racism, I will talk about four key institutions that have habituated U.S. citizens into anti-black racism. The first institution is the slave plantation. Most historians of the peculiar institution of slavery in the U.S. have noted that it was slavery in the U.S. that chained blackness to servitude and whiteness to liberty. Slaves historically have been of all races, but in the U.S., the institution of slavery created a chromocracy, a hierarchical order in which blackness was legally defined as servitude and whiteness as freedom. Over 245 years, the institution of slavery produced blackness as a race that was marked by dispossession and dehumanization. The second institution, or rather set of institutions, is what was called Jim Crow, which is shorthand for Jim Crow laws that were legislated after the end of the Civil War. Jim Crow, de facto, was the juridification of segregation. Buses, trains, bathrooms, water fountains, schools, neighborhoods, voting booths, in general, almost every imaginable public institution was racially segregated. But we can't understand the impact of Jim Crow on the production of race if we don't first note how it emerged. Slavery was abolished with the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party should have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." This is indeed a remarkable text. On the one hand, it abolished slavery as a form of private property that sustained the whole political economy and cultural life of the South. On the other, the text creates immediately a legal exception. Slavery will endure, but now as a form of punishment to be enacted by the state. Now, state-run slavery as a form of punishment defines blackness as criminality. At the very moment that blacks were freed, their entry into civil society and the social space of freedom is immediately made conditional. In fact, during the Reconstruction period, a whole set of what were called black laws were issued that de facto criminalized any and most activities of recently liberated blacks. This process of criminalizing blackness culminated with the 1896 Supreme Court ruling Plessy versus Ferguson that ratified the constitutionality of the separate but equal doctrine. The third institution I want to talk about is the Black Ghetto. The ghetto is not simply an urban space. It is a series of legal, economic, political, and of course, educational institutions. The Black Ghetto is the direct result of Jim Crow. And we could say that the ghetto is the crystallization of the separate but equal doctrine in urban space. It replaces the slave plantation as a way to contain, marginalize, segregate, and dispossess African Americans. The fourth and final institution that I will discuss is what I would call the ethno-racial prison. The U.S. constitutes 5% of the world population, yet it has 25% of the world prison population. In 2015, the United States has a prison population of about 2.2 million prisoners, representing a 500% increase in the last 3 decades. Of this number, more than 60% are made up of African Americans and other minorities, mostly Latinos, while 1 in every 17 white males has the likelihood of being in prison, 1 in 3 black males is more likely to end up in prison. In fact, For Black males in their 30s, 1 in 10 is either in a prison or a jail on any given day. But if we look at these rates of incarceration, what we have, in fact, is a racial prison industrial complex. Prisons are a way to deprive supposed criminals of their freedom as a way to pay society for their crimes and violations of the social contract. They began as institutions of reform and re-education, but have turned into sites of political disenfranchisement, economic privation, and desocialization. In this way, they perform a dual role. They're sites of dispossession and sites of capital extraction. They're political economic engines that transfer economic wealth and political capital from blacks to whites and those that benefit from whiteness. In the history of the United States, these four institutions have been intricately entwined, seamlessly transitioning into each other. Over the last 400 years, these racist institutions have produced, reproduced, renewed, and made racism enduring in the US. Over the last 400 years, they have produced blackness as a race that is associated with dispossession, criminality, marginality, and privation. Race does not exist precisely because it is the relationship among these institutions and how they created certain habits that determine how we interact with each other on assumptions and prejudices about who we think is black. A radical philosophy of race allows us to think through the seeming paradox of the non-existence of race, yet grapple with its visible and violent effects. With Angela Davis, we can say that slavery has yet to be abolished, as its long shadow continues to darken our democracy. Thank you.